At 11:23 a.m. on September 19, 1944, time was collapsing inside the steel tomb of an M4 Sherman tank near Arracourt, France. The air was thick with the scent of oil and fear. Crouched in the loader's position was Private First Class Walter Kowalski. He wasn't a tanker. He was a mechanic, a replacement loader who had handled a training round exactly 4 times in his life before this moment. What separated him from the grave was 800 yards of empty field, where 3 German Panzer IV tanks were relentlessly closing. His hands were already slick with cold sweat, the residue of the man who held this post 2 days prior, a man killed when a Panzer round punched clean through their turret. The crew was screaming coordinates and traverse speeds, a frantic, unintelligible chorus of survival. Walter had to grab the 38-pound high-explosive shell and slam it into the breach, fast. But the training manual, the sacred doctrine taught at Fort Knox, demanded he stand a certain way, pivot a certain way, use his hands a certain way. For a left-handed kid with an injured, barely functioning right arm, the rules were simply a death sentence. The gunner next to him shoved him. The shell nearly slipped. The Panzers were at 600 yards. And in that desperate, claustrophobic second, Walter did something no manual, no officer, and no tank crew had ever suggested. He broke the one rule that might have saved his life. The proper method of loading the 75mm shell was a rigid dogma, drilled into every recruit at Fort Knox. It demanded the loader grip the shell nose forward, align the brass base with the breech, slam it home, and step clear. The entire sequence was designed for safety and efficiency, taking 4 seconds if you were good. But inside the cramped turret of the M4 Sherman, efficiency vanished for men like Walter. The manual-mandated method was designed for a right-handed loader. To follow the rule, Walter, who was left-handed and now nursing a severely damaged right shoulder, was forced to lead with his weaker, injured side. When he turned to face the breach properly, his left elbow smashed into the gunner's shoulder. The gunner had to shove him hard, nearly causing him to drop the 38-pound shell. The official method, meant to be safe and repeatable, created dangerous collisions and fumbled shells in combat. In the face of closing German fire, the official training manual was not a guide. It was actively killing people. The commander was screaming now. The Panzers, previously distant threats, were solidifying into dark, fast-moving shapes at 500 yards. The turret was a thunderous, shaking cage. Walter was caught in the agonizing 2-second hesitation between the rule and survival. His hands, slick and shaking, were actively working against the official training. Every ingrained instinct told him to fail, to fumble, to die. In that fraction of a second, fueled by desperation and his physical limitations, Walter turned his back on the training. He spun, his body away from the breach, reversing his stance entirely. He guided the 38-pound shell nose backward over his shoulder, feeling for the opening with the brass base first. It was a completely illogical, almost impossible motion, a move that looked less like loading a gun and more like pushing a heavy weight off his back. But this awkward, rule-breaking pivot allowed him to bring his dominant left arm and his full body weight into the push. He didn't fumble. He didn't fumble for the angle. He simply shoved hard in one desperate, intuitive motion. The breech mechanism caught the round, slammed shut, and the gun was immediately ready to fire. He had cut the loading time from 4 seconds to less than 2 seconds flat. The breech slammed shut. Boom! The 75mm gun barked. The turret recoiled and the tank shook violently. Without waiting for the smoke to clear or the spent casing to be ejected, Walter was already pivoting for the next shell, repeating the backward, instinctual shove. Boom! A second round was loaded and fired in less than 2 seconds. He was operating at a rate that should have been physically impossible in that environment. Walter was no longer thinking about the manual. He was operating on pure, desperate muscle memory. As the gunner called out a third and then a fourth successful impact, the tempo inside the Sherman reached a fever pitch. In just 6 minutes of brutal, close-range combat, 4 German tanks, the superior Panzers, were reduced to burning scrap. A silence fell inside the turret, broken only by the crackle of burning fuel outside. The commander, his voice husky with disbelief, finally cut through the noise. 4 impacts, 4 kills. The crew turned, not to celebrate the victory, but to stare at the exhausted, sweat-soaked mechanic who had just violated every written rule. The shock was palpable. The impossible rate of fire had just validated the forbidden method, saving 5 lives in the process. The survival of Walter's crew wasn't just a lucky break. It was a statistical impossibility that underscores the depth of the challenge facing American tankers. From the moment the M4 Sherman entered the European theater, it was fundamentally outclassed. It was designed primarily as an infantry support tank, fast, reliable, and mass-produced, not a peer-to-peer duel machine. The German armored divisions knew this. Their heavy tanks, the Panzers, the Panthers, and especially the monolithic Tigers, possessed thicker sloped armor and larger, more powerful 75mm and 88mm guns. In the summer of 1944, particularly during the ferocious fighting in Normandy, the statistics were a death knell. American forces accepted a brutal 4-to-1 loss ratio for their Shermans. This grim reality wasn't academic. It was the daily terror of men in a rolling metal target. At Villers-Bocage, the single action of a lone Tiger tank under Michael Whitman destroyed a staggering 14 Shermans in minutes. During Operation Goodwood, the British sustained similar devastating losses. In every encounter, the core problem was the same. The Sherman had to hit the German tank multiple times to disable it, but the German tank needed only 1 clean shot to kill the Sherman. If the American loader took 4 or 5 seconds to reload, they guaranteed themselves only 1 shot before the enemy had time for a devastating follow-up. This was the catastrophic global context that made Walter Kowalski's 4-0 victory a monumental, history-altering anomaly. To understand Walter's desperate innovation, we must first analyze the fundamental failures of the official 4 to 5 second loading doctrine. That time frame was built for a static classroom, not the violent physics of combat. The M4 Sherman, lacking the advanced gyroscopic stabilization of later tanks, was constantly pitching and yawing under its own movement, or worse, as from enemy fire. The manual required the loader to hold the heavy 38-pound shell out in front of their body with 2 hands, forcing them to search for the breech opening. This created a pendulum effect. Every shift in the tank's motion multiplied the shell's weight and momentum, making fine alignment almost impossible. The standard grip sacrificed stability for perceived control. The result of this instability was the fumbled shell. A loader might miss the opening, dropping the shell onto the turret floor, or worse, jamming it halfway into the breech. In that crucial moment, the crew wasn't fighting. They were struggling with their own equipment. The German gunner only needed 4 seconds for a second killing shot. The manual, by adding the high probability of a 2-second fumble, effectively ensured the Sherman was too slow, giving away the precious time needed for a second-round kill. The system failed because it ignored the claustrophobic, high-G reality of the battlefield. The systemic failure of the manual was amplified by a crucial, unforgivable oversight, the left-handed curse. The Sherman's turret was a marvel of efficient, compact design, but its layout was rigidly right-hand optimized. Everything from the positioning of the ready rack to the final alignment with the breech assumed the loader was pivoting and pushing with his right side. For left-handed loaders like Walter, following the rules meant fighting their own natural motor instinct. When attempting the prescribed method, Walter's dominant, stronger left arm was consistently hampered. His left elbow would slam into the traverse wheel or the gunner's seat, forcing an awkward, painful realignment. This wasn't a minor annoyance. It was a compounding delay. That extra 1 to 2 seconds of fumbling, the time spent fighting his natural instinct and the turret's layout, was the difference between loading a second defensive round and being disabled by a German countershot. The rule was an unintended form of prejudice, a mechanical bias that sentenced a specific subset of soldiers to a higher risk of death simply because they loaded with the hand the army failed to account for. Walter's desperate action wasn't a fluke. It was a pure, intuitive response to flawed physics. The seemingly backwards movement unlocked 3 critical secrets that instantaneously turned the Sherman's greatest weakness into a sudden, devastating strength. This is the technical value that satisfies the audience's deep curiosity. First and most crucial was the secret of leverage. When a loader uses the official nose-forward method, they are pushing the 38-pound shell with their arms extended, relying on brute shoulder and tricep strength, a tiring and inefficient motion. By turning his back to the breech and using his left arm to guide the shell backward, Walter instantly engaged his entire body. He wasn't pushing, he was shoving, using the powerful muscles of his back, core, and legs in a natural squatting motion. It was like closing a heavy door with your whole body mass instead of just your outstretched hand. This shift in leverage meant the shell went home with greater force and less conscious effort. The second secret was space. The standard method, as we saw, forced the left-handed Walter to collide with the gunner in the cramped turret. By turning his back, he instantly minimized his body profile. He was no longer a 2-foot-wide obstacle, but a narrow plane, moving the shell and his center of gravity away from the gunner and the turret walls. This provided the unobstructed space necessary to perform the push in one fluid motion, eliminating the devastating fumble time entirely. Finally, the technique harnessed instinct. The official method required training and conscious thought, a mental sequence that quickly broke down under the stress of an incoming 88mm shell. Walter's backwards technique, however, was a simple, natural, gross motor movement, a push with the dominant hand. It was a motion that didn't require precision alignment or conscious control. It simply required getting the shell from point A to point B in the most physically intuitive way. This instant reliance on instinct and the dominant limb meant Walter could load and reload faster, blindfolded than other men could with clear sight, making the 2-second reload repeatable, reliable, and deadly. This simple physics hack doubled the crew's rate of fire and, in doing so, effectively doubled their chances of survival. Walter's immediate victory solved one problem, the closing Panzers, but created a dozen others back at command. His commander, Sergeant Miller, witnessed the impossible rate of fire but knew the truth. The backward method was a gross violation of 4 separate safety regulations. He chose not to report it. Instead, the secret spread through whispers. The technique moved not by official decree but by battlefield necessity. It was taught in quick, furtive demonstrations behind maintenance sheds and beside disabled tanks. Tankers who watched the impossible, loading speed, were immediately gripped by FOMO, fear of missing out. They knew if they didn't learn the forbidden trick, they were accepting a lower chance of survival. Units that silently adopted this rogue method began to display unexplainable success. Their tank kill rates were rising, and their crew losses were falling, defying the brutal war statistics. This created a powerful sense of exclusivity and subversion among the crews. They were the ones in the know, possessing the secret that circumvented the clumsy, lethal bureaucracy of the army. The regulation had been defeated, not by an order from a general, but by the shared, desperate knowledge of men trying not to die. The secret, once confined to the tight quarters of individual tanks, could only stay a secret for so long. The anomalous survival rates of certain companies finally caught the attention of Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams. Abrams, a hard-driving, brilliant tank commander and future Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, cared only about one thing: results. Observing a training exercise, Abrams noticed a crew performing the loading sequence with an inexplicable speed. It was a fluid, powerful motion that defied the established, slower rhythms of the standard protocol. He immediately halted the exercise and demanded an explanation from the bewildered crew. They quickly confessed to the forbidden backward technique, expecting immediate punishment. Abrams did not reprimand them. He watched a demonstration, observed the 2-second flat speed, and saw the physics of the technique in action. The colonel's response was characteristically pragmatic and utterly devoid of bureaucracy. He asked one single penetrating question that cut through years of doctrine and dogma. Does it work better than the manual? With this question, the stakes had officially risen. The rule-breaking innovation was no longer just a shared secret. It was on the desk of an ascending, critical authority figure, one step closer to changing the war. Colonel Abrams, now armed with proof, didn't wait for permission from above. He instantly ordered his entire battalion to disregard the manual and adopt the backward loading method. But the ultimate approval lay higher. The whispers and the climbing kill ratios eventually reached General George S. Patton, Jr., commander of the U.S. Third Army, a man who valued speed, aggression, and results above all else. Patton, famously dismissive of red tape, demanded a live demonstration. Walter Kowalski himself was called upon. The general stood in the muck, his helmet gleaming, a stopwatch in his hand. He watched the rule-abiding loader struggle to hit 4 seconds, then watched Walter execute the forbidden backward shove. Patton's eye was on the seconds. 3 seconds? 2.8 seconds. The dramatic difference was undeniable. With characteristic finality, Patton returned his stopwatch to his pocket and issued a direct, non-negotiable mandate. Every tank battalion in 3rd Army would adopt this loading method immediately. In one definitive order, the most powerful combat general in the European theater had validated the scared mechanic's improvisation. This moment was the systemic climax, the ultimate payoff where the underdog's secret was officially codified, changing tank warfare overnight and completing Walter's hero's journey from mechanic to tactical revolutionary. Patton's command was a strategic earthquake. With immediate effect, the backward loading method was disseminated across his entire command, a maneuver that affected over 4,000 M4 Sherman tanks across the European theater. The impact was not anecdotal. It was measurable, shifting the brutal arithmetic of the war. By simply cutting 2 seconds off the reload time, Third Army tankers were able to fire a critical defensive second round before the German gunner could sight and fire his own second decisive shot. This tactical advantage dramatically altered the balance of power. Third Army's catastrophic tank-kill ratio, which had often favored the German side by over 3-to-1 against the Sherman, rapidly improved to just 1.4-to-1 against them. This near equalizing of odds was massive. This single improvised act of subversion by a mechanic also translated directly into saving lives. Records show crew survival rates across Patton's mechanized units increased by nearly 18% in the ensuing months. The technique, though never formally added to the written manual, spread like wildfire across the entire Allied effort, becoming the unspoken standard in both the European and Pacific theaters. It was a clear demonstration of massive scale and awe. A seemingly minor, rule-breaking physical motion had become one of the most significant life-saving tactical innovations of the entire ground war. Despite the systemic impact of his innovation, Walter Kowalski received no medal for his split-second act of genius. The rationale from high command was cold and bureaucratic. The Army doesn't award decorations for violating regulations. The rule technically remained the rule, even if every tanker in the Third Army now ignored it. Walter's official recognition was limited to a promotion to corporal and the respect of the men whose lives he saved. He completed his tour of duty, officially credited with the destruction of 23 enemy tanks as a loader using his forbidden technique. When the war ended, Walter Kowalski did not write a memoir or seek fame. He quietly returned to his home in Detroit and resumed his life as a mechanic. The Army manual itself was never formally revised during the war to incorporate the backward method. This deliberate avoidance of official endorsement highlights the powerful sense of injustice that makes this story resonate. The man who saved countless lives was denied recognition because his life-saving act broke 4 lines of text in a forgotten book. He remains the quiet, unrewarded hero, deepening the audience's emotional connection to his humble, rule-breaking legacy. The legacy of Walter's desperate rule-breaking shove did not end with the fall of Berlin. Though his method remained undocumented in the official Army field manuals, it became an indelible part of military oral tradition. At Fort Knox and other armored training centers, new generations of tankers were still being taught the technique, often in hushed, practical after-hours sessions as they prepared for the next conflict. During the Korean War, Marine Corps Sherman crews directly benefited from this accelerated rate of fire, helping them overcome North Korean armor advantages. As the decades progressed and the guns got larger, the principle remained. Tankers adapted the high-leverage back-turned shove for the 90mm guns of the M48 Patton and the massive 105mm shells of the M60 Patton during the Vietnam War. It became a persistent, non-codified piece of hidden knowledge that persisted in the American Tank Corps until the late 1980s, when automated loading systems finally rendered human loaders obsolete. For 4 decades, the innovation that saved Walter's life continued to save others. It is the ultimate testament to enduring value. A simple 2-second mechanical hack, born of necessity and fear, became a silent tactical advantage that survived the inventor's obscurity, satisfying the viewer's realization that the most effective history is often hidden just beneath the surface of official records. Today, if you visit the Patton Museum of Cavalry and Armor, you can walk right up to a meticulously restored M4 Sherman tank. The museum placard details its specifications, armor thickness, gun caliber, engine horsepower. It mentions that American tank crews developed innovative tactics to overcome their disadvantages against German armor. But it will not mention Walter Kowalski. It will not mention the forbidden backward loading method. This silence is the most profound part of the story. It teaches us that the greatest, most life-saving innovations rarely come from generals or manuals. They come from scared 20-year-old mechanics who had to figure out a better way to load a shell because the rule book was trying to kill them. Wars are ultimately won not by superior equipment, but by ordinary people making split-second decisions and having the courage to break a rule when the rule doesn't work. Walter Kowalski never sought fame. He was just a left-handed kid from Detroit who saved his life and the lives of hundreds of others. If you found this forgotten story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us give final justice to the heroes the Army forgot. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories and join our community of enthusiasts who understand what he had given them. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.